Good morning. My name is Taylor Jansen, and today I'm going to be talking about professional development and diversity. I want to begin by talking about my ideal classroom in terms of classroom management and positive behavioral supports. So, my ideal classroom is to establish an environment that promotes my desired behaviors from the beginning of the year. So, to manage these issues before they start, not after. This begins by establishing rules and procedures from the very beginning of the school year, and they're explained very thoroughly. And depending on the grade level, they're often modeled. So, because I'm planning on teaching elementary, I will do modeling myself, and then I'll choose a student to model the correct behavior, the incorrect behavior, and then the correct behavior again. Some of the rules I'm going to consider will be when the students can talk, when they can use the restroom, when to turn in assignments, or how to resolve conflicts amongst themselves. And I'll reiterate these rules after a holiday or a long break, a long weekend, if we have a new student join the class, because they'll need to learn these behaviors. And also, if the students are just failing to follow my classroom instruction and they just need a refresher, it'll really be up to my discretion on when, or if you notice they're not following them properly. When it comes to creating these rules, I believe that the students should be part of the creation process for most of them, just because it holds them more accountable. They'll be allowed to give some input on the severity or the consequences and what they think is fair. I believe that if students are presented with a bunch of rules that they really dislike and they don't think are equal, then it will be harder for them to want to follow along and participate. So discussing some positive behavior supports in the classroom, it often takes a few weeks to adapt to these. Most students in special education, you'll have a general knowledge of their behaviors depending on the grade level when they're coming into your classroom. So what are their likes and their dislikes and their overall needs. So throughout the first week or so, it will become clear how the students will interact with each other, how their disabilities or personalities clash or don't clash. So this allows you to adjust the seating or what incentives you'll need to give these students in order to do their work and turn their assignments in on time. Positive behavior supports also need to be measured. So they require some close observation to properly alter this environment. And once the behavior is known, it's easier for the teacher to observe, and then we can establish a goal for the student to achieve. So the goal is kind of like an agreed upon contract that would be between the teacher and the student, and they would receive a reward for achieving this goal, whether it's daily or weekly. For example, if the student turns in their assignments or completes their assignments, or even if it's as simple as working diligently in class, they will get an extra 5 to 10 minutes of free time at the end of the day. This is really going to depend on the student's personality. So after a few weeks of school, we've noticed some discourse in the classroom, and we really haven't adjusted well to the new management or behavior supports. So if my classroom would fall to discourse at some time, I would collect data on the issue, like what is the problem, and it will help me address it later. So the issue of talking, then I would rearrange the seating. I would record who is the talker and chatty and needs to be closer to the front of the class or not in the middle, so they're not as tempted to talk to their neighbors. If the issue was an emotional outburst, I would really need to identify the trigger that was affecting the child and then adjust. I would have to ask myself, what is the attention the child is wanting, and rearrange my tactics based off of that behavior. So if the student is having an outburst because they need more teacher interaction, maybe I should move them to the front of the class and call on them more frequently, or have them be a teacher's helper so they're up and around and they know that I am paying attention to them without them having an outburst. So if my students are having some social difficulties, one tactic I believe is beneficial is self-regulation. So this process of self-regulation is think alouds, modeling, processing, or process direct praise, criticism, reinforced student programs, encouragement, personal responsibilities, sharing personal failures, and more. So a lot of this will come from my side. I will model the students how to walk through a think aloud. Well, as I'm doing an assignment, I'll talk myself through it. I'll read the directions out loud to myself. I'll talk to myself how I'm going to achieve this assignment and then properly complete it. Another one that I can do as a teacher is share a personal failure, because some students are very frustrated when they can't complete things on the first time, and often coming from someone who seems so accomplished, if they hear that we also struggle with things, then they'll be more liable to keep trying. There are some more serious interventions needed for different scenarios, such as suicidal thoughts. These thoughts should never be ignored, and they really need to be given a more direct intervention, not something as like a pep talk. They call for more drastic measures. Aside from having a really drastic case, it's important for these students to have a goal in mind. That way they have something to work for and something that is attainable. So once we find a solution, we can really put it to the test and measure how well the student has done. So next, I'm going to discuss an evidence-based strategy that I like, and I chose ASSET. I really like this strategy because it has an emphasis on social skills that are needed to function later in society, and especially for some special needs students, these are skills that they will really need to learn. There are 8 skills that are associated with ASSET, and they're really, really important for any individual to know. These skills include giving positive feedback, receiving negative feedback, accepting negative feedback, resisting peer pressure, problem solving, negotiating, following instructions, and just having a proper conversation with another individual. So I would implement this strategy just like I would any other subject. We would collaborate as a group, discussing and modeling the skill. I would explain why they are so valuable for the students to have, and we would carry them out in practice. So once modeled, the student's going to be given opportunities to repeat or display the same characteristics. After the group session, I would assign them some homework for them to rehearse these characteristics and use them with students in the class period. During the next class, we would review and then talk about our experiences and if the student had any positive interactions throughout the school system. I would expect this to have a positive impact because modeling has been a very effectively proven strategy, and because they give very gratifying results. So by encouraging them to practice in other settings, like around the school with other personnel, it would just help adjust to their real world. One concern that I would have is that if they're out of class or out of the school building and they lack the practice, then all the ground that we gained would diminish because these students wouldn't be getting the positive feedback they need in order to obtain these skills. Students with some learning disorders need that lifelong practice and lots of encouragement. That way they contain the skills that they have learned. So finally, I'm going to discuss some procedures involving the instructional environment and the physical environment. Some of the classroom arrangements are very important to promote appropriate and healthy behavior, just as I had talked about before. Some of the instructional arrangements can make a big difference on students with different learning abilities. So these teacher-led instruction is going to be based more on a group or one-to-one. And there's also student-led instruction, which is kind of like a peer-to-peer tutoring system where you have a student who is very, very good with the lesson or one that is struggling, and you pair them together so that they can build off of each other. Starting with large group instruction, it consists of 6 or more students, and it's really important for the teacher to choose material that all of the students are capable of understanding at the same time. That way she doesn't have to provide, or he have to provide, a lot of individual assistance. So this is really intended for the teacher to lead the instruction and to have discussion afterwards. There is also small group instruction, which is 2 to 6 students. It's when the teacher wants to give these students a little more direct feedback. So they're in groups either very similar to their learning abilities or very opposite to their learning abilities. It just depends on the subject that is provided. And it's usually used when a group of students is having difficulties working together. One-to-one instruction allows the teacher to provide more intensive, direct how-to with their lesson. This is also a perfect time to assess students if you're using like a response to intervention approach, and it can be applied with large group instruction incorporated with peer tutoring as well as cooperative learning. So then we get into the peer-to-peer tutoring. So independent learning takes place after the initial instruction's been given by the teacher, and it usually incorporates a worksheet, or they could have special computer activities, or even listen to an audiobook. And this is only applicable when students have a thorough understanding of the assignment, and it allows them to kind of collaborate with their neighbor as they're working on their own. Cooperative learning is team-based and requires 4 elements. There's student interdependence, collaboration, individual accountability, and group processing. And students each take on a role. So one student would be a spokesperson, one student would be a group leader to help organize the assignment, and so forth. So there's peer teaching, which is where students learn to interact with after the initial assignment has been given by the teacher, and one will be the tutor student to demonstrate their thorough understanding, and the other student will be one that struggles with the topic. There is class-wide peer tutoring, which really focuses on improving reading abilities, and you pair a student who is very good at reading with a student who struggles a little bit, has a little bit weaker ability, and they're able to participate in this together, read aloud, and talk through and give assistance when needed. Some of the physical arrangements are really important in the classroom, because in today's classroom, we really need to keep designated areas for materials and equipment. Children are really drawn to technology, and it's often easier to keep it out of sight and out of mind, especially at the younger ages, until it's time of need. It also helps to have a designated reading area because it encourages children to read. So if you provide a special couch or pillows, it entices them to sit down with a book. Also, if you have different areas of the rooms for specific items, it helps children transition to different types of learning. So when we go from small group to individual, the children automatically know in their mind that we're changing to something else. It helps them to adjust. Such as, for an example, if the student is working in a small, or working on their own, and we transition to a small group, they know that they're going from having quiet time, transitioning over to now we can talk with our peers and work on this assignment together. So this is my presentation on professional development and diversity, and I hope it has enlightened you on some classroom management and techniques for better behavioral supports. And thank you for listening.